This animal doesn't die of old age. It doesn't die of predators. It doesn't die of disease in the way anything else does. It dies of sex, specifically its own. There is a small, mouse-shaped creature living in the forests of eastern Australia that every single male of the species is dead before its first birthday. Not from bad luck, not from a rough winter, from mating. And the way it happens is one of the strangest, most disturbing stories in all of biology. The animal is called the antechinus. That's pronounced antechinus. There are around 15 known species of it, and if you saw one darting across your patio at night, you'd probably grab a broom. It looks like a house mouse. It behaves like a house mouse. It is not a mouse. It's a marsupial, a distant cousin of kangaroos and koalas, and it carries a secret in its biology that scientists spent decades trying to understand and are still, in some ways, trying to explain today. Here's the shape of the story we're going to walk through. There is a species where the males, all of them, every year, mate themselves to death over the course of about 2 weeks. It's not a metaphor, it's not exaggeration for a YouTube title, it's the actual documented, peer-reviewed reality of what happens in the forests of Queensland every winter. And before we're done, I'm going to tell you about the moment scientists figured out what was killing them and why that answer, honestly, made things worse. Start with the size of the animal. An adult antechinus is about 4 to 5 inches long from nose to base of tail, and it weighs somewhere between ½ ounce and 2½ ounces. Smaller than a hamster, lighter than a slice of bread. It has bulging dark eyes, 4 pairs of sharp teeth, and a long twitchy snout it uses to hunt spiders, cockroaches, centipedes, and any insect it can overpower. In terms of hunting style, it's more like a shrew than a mouse. It's a carnivore, a tiny, aggressive, permanently hungry carnivore. And here's the first thing that separates the antechinus from every other small mammal you've probably ever heard of. In most rodent-sized species, a male reaches breeding age, mates through the year, ages, and dies whenever he dies. Cause of death could be anything: owl, snake, feral cat, disease, exposure, whatever. The point is, mating is one activity among many across a lifespan. In the antechinus, mating is not one activity among many. Mating is the last activity. Full stop. Once the season starts, the biological countdown starts with it, and nothing the male does can stop it. To understand why, you have to understand the schedule. Antechinus males reach sexual maturity at almost exactly 11 months old. Not 10, not 12, 11 plus or minus a few days. And the whole population is synchronized. When the mating season arrives, usually in the Australian winter, every male of that population hits the same biological wall at the same moment. And it isn't a wall they climb over, it's a wall they slam into at full speed. About a month before mating starts, something quietly catastrophic happens inside the male's body. His testes, which are already enormous relative to his body size, shut down sperm production entirely, permanently. From that point on, he cannot make new sperm, ever. What he has stored in a coiled tube called the epididymis is all he will ever have, and even that supply is leaking. Males lose sperm continuously in their urine during this window. The scientific term for it is spermatorrhea. In plain English, the clock isn't just ticking, the clock is bleeding out. So when the mating season finally arrives, the male antechinus has a small, non-renewable supply of sperm, a rapidly closing window to use it, and roughly 2 weeks to compete with every other male in the forest for every female he can find. What happens next is not romance. It's not even really courtship. It's a marathon. Male antechinus have been observed to mate for up to 14 hours at a stretch, not 14 minutes. 14 hours, and they don't stop after one session. They find another female and they do it again and again. During this period, the males stop eating, they stop grooming, they almost stop sleeping. A recent study out of La Trobe University in Australia found that during breeding season, male antechinus cut about 3 hours off their normal sleep every night, sacrificing rest to spend more time chasing females. Their entire waking existence collapses down to one activity, performed at a physiological intensity that would kill almost any other mammal on Earth. Now, this is where I want you to pause for a second and picture the environment. You are in a temperate Australian forest. It's cold, wet, the ground is thick with leaf litter and moss. In the branches and burrows, thousands of tiny mouse-sized marsupials are doing nothing but fighting, mating, and slowly falling apart. That's the setting. Keep it in mind, because what's happening inside those little bodies is the real story. Here's the physiology. During breeding season, the male antechinus is producing testosterone at levels that would, in a human being, be considered a medical emergency. That testosterone does two things. It powers the marathon aggression and the marathon copulation, and it also, quietly, shuts off a molecular safety valve. In the bloodstream of most mammals, there's a protein called corticosteroid-binding globulin. Its job is to grab onto cortisol, the main stress hormone, and hold it in a bound, inactive form so it can't damage the body. Cortisol is useful in small doses. In large doses, it's a poison. The surge of testosterone in the male antechinus knocks out that binding protein. And the moment the binding protein disappears, the cortisol in his blood becomes free, active, everywhere. And unlike a normal stress response, there is no shut-off switch left. The feedback loop that should tell his brain, enough, stop making cortisol, has been severed. His body is now flooding itself with unbound stress hormone 24 hours a day, and it can't stop. What cortisol does at that level is horrifying. It strips away the mucus lining of the stomach and intestines. It suppresses the immune system to the point where any infection, any parasite the animal is carrying, gets a free ride. It breaks down skeletal muscle for energy, cannibalizing the animal's own body to fuel more mating. It causes internal bleeding. It causes fur to fall out in patches. Late-stage breeding males look, honestly, like something out of a horror movie. Bald patches, ulcers, eyes sunken from exhaustion, still trying to mate. Imagine for a moment running a marathon at full sprint, not jogging, sprinting. Now imagine doing that for 2 weeks straight, no food, almost no sleep, while your immune system quietly turns off and your muscles digest themselves for fuel. That is roughly what a male antechinus is going through in his final days. Except he doesn't know he's dying. He just knows he needs to find another female, and another, and another. His entire nervous system has been rewired to serve one function, and it will keep firing until the body underneath it simply stops working. The first scientist to really nail down the hormonal mechanism was Anthony Bradley at Monash University in Australia, whose work in the late 1970s and 1980s laid out how the cortisol feedback loop breaks down in these animals. Bradley was studying a species called Antechinus stuartii, pronounced Stuartii, when he ran what's called a dexamethasone suppression test on the males. A standard tool that normally shuts off cortisol production. The males' bodies simply ignored it. The off switch wasn't working. That single result cracked open decades of confusion about why these animals were dying. And it's still the foundation of what we understand today. And this is where the story goes from strange to genuinely disturbing. In the last few years, researchers from the Queensland University of Technology documented something nobody expected. Male antechinus, in their final days, will eat the corpses of other male antechinus that have already died. Cannibalism in what is essentially their own funeral. They are burning through calories so fast, and their bodies are breaking down so completely that the dead males become a food source for the living ones, who are themselves about to become food. By the end of the 2-week breeding season, every male in the population is dead. Not most, not almost all, every one. The species survives entirely because the females, who mate with multiple males and store the sperm from all of them, are still alive and pregnant. A single litter of antechinus can have as many as 14 young, with multiple different fathers represented in the same litter. The mothers give birth about a month later. The babies are about the size of a grain of rice at birth, and they grow up in a forest where their fathers and their uncles and every adult male of the previous generation no longer exist. Which brings us to the obvious question: why? Why would evolution build a system this brutal? What possible advantage could there be to killing off half of your breeding population every single year? For decades, this puzzled biologists. It looked on the surface like the least efficient reproductive strategy imaginable. The first serious theory was altruism. Maybe, the thinking went, by dying, the males were removing themselves from the food supply, leaving more insects and spiders for the pregnant females to eat. Kind of a noble sacrifice, in a bleak way. That theory held for a while. Then it fell apart because when researchers looked at the numbers, the amount of extra food the females actually got from the missing males was not enough to justify the cost of losing an entire generation of adult males every year. The theory that has since taken over is much colder, much more interesting. In 2013, a researcher named Diana Fisher at the University of Queensland led a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that made the case for something called sperm competition. Here's how it works. Because the females mate with multiple males and store all that sperm, the actual fertilization is essentially a race. Whoever's sperm is best and whoever's sperm there is more of wins. From the male's perspective, evolution has stopped rewarding a long life and started rewarding one thing only: the ability to flood as many females as possible with as much high-quality sperm as possible in as short a window as possible before permanent infertility hits. Once you're in that competitive arms race, everything about the antechinus makes sense. The oversized testes, the permanent shutdown of sperm production, which frees up all the animal's energy for one final push. The 14-hour marathon sessions, the muscle catabolism, the willingness to sacrifice sleep, food, and eventually life itself. From a cold evolutionary perspective, a male antechinus who lives to a ripe old age but only fathers a handful of offspring loses. A male who dies in agony at 11 months but fathers 30 or 40 offspring wins. Genetics does not care about the animal that carries the genes. Genetics only cares about which genes get into the next generation. So the antechinus is not doing anything irrational. It is doing the most rational thing possible given the game it's playing. It's just that the game happens to be lethal. If all of this sounds like an isolated Australian oddity, it isn't. The antechinus is the most famous example of what biologists call semal parity, from the Latin words meaning to beget once. It refers to any species where an individual invests everything, and I mean everything, into a single reproductive event and dies as a direct result. Pacific salmon do this. They swim hundreds of miles upstream from the ocean, sometimes over 1,000 miles, without eating, spawn once, and die within weeks. Male honeybee drones do this. Their mating flight with the queen is fatal. Male praying mantises, in many species, do this because the female eats them during copulation. Male black widow spiders. Male Australian redback spiders. Female octopuses stop eating after laying eggs, brood their clutch until it hatches, and die. Cicadas. Mayflies. There is an entire lineage of parasitic insects called Strepsiptera, where the males live about 6 hours, mate once, and die. Semal parity is not rare in biology overall. It is rare in mammals. Of every mammal species on Earth, only 4 genera do this, and every single one of them is a small carnivorous marsupial in Australia or nearby islands. The antechinus, the phascogolas, the dasycoluta, sometimes called the little red coluta, and the northern quoll, which is the largest known mammal to undergo this kind of male die-off, weighing up to about 2.5 pounds. That last one is worth pausing on. The northern quoll, scientific name Dasyurus halucatus, pronounced Dasyurus halucatus, is roughly the size of a small house cat, and every male of the species in synchronized breeding populations dies after a single mating season. What's strange about the quoll is that, unlike the antechinus, its die-off doesn't seem to be caused by cortisol poisoning. Researchers have studied it for decades and still can't fully explain the mechanism. In a paper published in the Journal of the Royal Society Open Science in 2023, a team led by Joshua Gashk found that male quolls dramatically reduce their sleep during breeding season, roaming enormous distances, running themselves into a state of exhaustion that may be its own kind of killer. Similarity in mammals, it turns out, doesn't have one universal cause. Different species get to the same brutal ending through different biological doors. But whether it's cortisol collapse in an antechinus, or sleep deprivation in a quoll, or starvation in a spawning salmon, the underlying logic is the same. The species has bet everything on one reproductive event. The animal is the vehicle. Reproduction is the destination. Once the delivery is made, the vehicle is discarded. Something almost mechanical happens in the language when you describe it that way. And that, I think, is part of what makes the antechinus so unsettling. It isn't cruel, it isn't sad in any way the animal itself understands. It is just a life history strategy, tested and refined by millions of years of natural selection, in which the individual animal is fully expendable. The species doesn't need the male past his one breeding season, so evolution stopped keeping him alive. One more layer to this, and it's the part that makes it hit close to home. Antechinuses are now being studied as animal models for aging research in humans. The reason is that their catastrophic senescence, the rapid, coordinated breakdown of their bodies at the end of the breeding season, looks in some ways like a compressed, fast-forward version of what happens to human bodies over the course of decades. Muscle wasting, immune failure, neurological decline, elevated cortisol. Brain changes that mirror aspects of Alzheimer's disease. What takes a human being 60 or 70 years, an antechinus does in 2 weeks. And in that compression, scientists see a possible window into the mechanisms of aging itself, which means that these strange little Australian marsupials, dying by the millions every winter in a 2-week orgy of self-destruction, might be doing more for our understanding of human biology than most of us will ever know. One last thing worth mentioning. The antechinus population is under threat. Several species are listed as endangered. Habitat loss, feral cats, and climate change are all pushing them toward extinction. And unlike most species, they don't have a buffer of long-lived adult males that can help stabilize populations through hard years. Every generation of antechinus is essentially built from scratch by mothers who lost their mates before their children were even born. If a breeding season goes badly, if the food supply crashes, if a habitat gets fragmented, the species doesn't have much room to recover. Some of these animals may quietly go extinct in our lifetimes, not because of us directly, though we're not helping, but because their reproductive strategy leaves no margin for error. They evolved for a world with steady prey cycles and stable forests. They did not evolve for the world that came next. You are alive right now because the mammals that led to you didn't play this game. Somewhere in the deep past of your family tree, ancestors chose the long, slow strategy. Live for years, breed many times, invest less in each reproductive event, but keep the vehicle running. That is the strategy that produced us. It is not the only strategy. It is one strategy among many. And the antechinus is a living reminder that biology has other doors it could have walked through. There is a small brown mouse-shaped animal in an Australian forest tonight. It is 11 months old. It has never mated. In a few weeks, its testosterone will spike, its stress hormones will flood free, its immune system will collapse, and it will die trying to father as many offspring as it possibly can before it goes. It doesn't know any of this. It just does what it's built to do. And that, more than anything else, is what makes it a story worth telling. Not the horror of it, not the strangeness. The fact that evolution, working blindly over millions of years, produced a creature whose entire life exists as a single unstoppable sprint toward one door, and then the animal walks through the door because it was never given the option not to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.